Out on the edge of the known galaxy, far beyond the bustling trade routes and colony rings, a single station floated in silence. It was old, patched with different metals from different decades, a lonely relic orbiting a quiet moon near a decaying wormhole. Most ships passed by without even a scan. It wasn't marked on updated charts anymore, but it was still alive because one human kept it that way. His name was Tom. Tom spent his days checking fuel lines, repairing thermal coils, and keeping the aging systems from falling apart. He had an AI assistant named Mira who helped monitor oxygen levels, guided maintenance drones, and sometimes spoke to him just to make sure he hadn't gone completely quiet like the rest of this corner of space. He liked the quiet, though. It was better than the noise he had left behind on Earth. Out here no one asked for anything, and no one expected anything. He did his job, ran his reports, and stayed out of trouble. Then one day everything changed. Mira alerted him to an incoming signal. It wasn't a trade vessel or a patrol craft. The identification codes didn't match any standard registry. The transmission was old in style but powerful and carried a strange rhythmic pattern that sounded more like thought than language. Mira processed it and translated it within seconds. The message was brief. A ship was requesting immediate docking due to critical system failure. No mention of cargo, no barter, no promise of credits. Tom stared at the transmission and frowned. Ships didn't come here. This wormhole had collapsed to the point of being useless for travel, and most of the nearby systems had long since been stripped clean or gone quiet. Mira displayed the ship's telemetry, and it looked worse than the message let on. Hull integrity was failing. Energy output was dropping fast. Life signs were faint but present. The vessel was clearly on the edge of destruction. Still, Tom hesitated. He had food and supplies, but only enough to last a while. The station had barely enough power to keep his systems running, and even small docking maneuvers drained his reserves. Letting them dock could put his own survival at risk. And then there was the matter of trust. No details, no promise, no payment. Just help. Yuj asked Mira if the message was genuine. Mira replied that based on the data, the distress was real. Number. Trace of deception, no hidden weapons, no signs of a trap. Tom looked out at the stars through the station's cracked observation panel. The ship was now visible to the naked eye, a dark silver shape drifting slowly toward him, its lights flickering. Its hull scorched and bent. He felt something move inside him, then a memory from years ago. He had once been in a similar place, drifting through space in a failing shuttle after a system malfunctioned during a cargo run. He had sent out 10 distress calls, and only one had answered. The ship that had picked him up was an old miner's freighter crewed by people who had no reason to help, but did anyway. No charge, no trade, just a hot drink, a warm place, and a ride back to safety. He had never forgotten that feeling. The unexpected kindness. The simple act of saying yes when it would have been easier to say no. He watched the ship approach and took a breath. Then he activated the docking beacon as the alien vessel locked onto the external port and came to a stop. Mira began scanning the interior. The ship's systems were failing fast, and environmental stability was minutes from collapse. The outer doors opened with a creak and hiss, and for a long moment, nothing moved inside. Then a figure appeared, tall, thin, covered in a smooth gray armor that looked grown instead of built. No weapons. No sudden movements. Just silent, calm presence. Tom stepped forward slowly, hands raised in a neutral gesture. The alien looked at him through a translucent face shield that flickered like liquid glass. Then it spoke, not with sound, but with thought, a pulse that echoed through Mira's translation systems. It introduced itself as Rel, a representative of the Aurentum. Had heard of the Auren. Everyone in the galaxy had. They were logical, cold, purely mathematical in their actions. Everything was a transaction, every word calculated to balance value and gain. If the Auren had come here without offering payment, that meant only one thing. They had nothing left to give. Rel explained the situation in plain terms. Their ship had been caught in a gravitic wave near the collapsing wormhole. The main engine core was damaged beyond repair. Life support was running on emergency backup. They had scanned the region and found only one station with enough oxygen and resources to sustain temporary repair. Rel made no offer of trade. No deal, no bargain. Just a request. Help us. Tom listened without speaking. He could feel Mira watching and calculating the odds behind the silence. Helping would cost him time, supplies, maybe more. There would be no reward, no gain, no fame. Just the act itself. He looked at Rel and nodded. You can stay, he said. I'll help. That's all. For a moment, Rel did not move. The liquid shimmer of his faceplate shifted slightly, as if processing something unfamiliar. Then the alien gave a slow, precise bow and stepped fully into the station. Behind him, two more Auran followed, both weak, barely able to stand. Mira opened the inner compartments and initiated emergency oxygen transfer. The station's lights dimmed as the power rerouted. Systems groaned under the strain, but held. Tom moved quickly to begin diagnostics and repairs. He didn't ask why they were here, or what had gone wrong. He didn't ask for thanks either. He simply did what needed to be done. Out in the cold stars, the damaged Auran ship rested silently against the docking port. Inside the station, a quiet human worked while three aliens watched, uncertain of the logic behind his choice, yet trusting it with their lives. And far beyond the wormhole, the universe remained silent, not knowing that something unexpected had just happened. A favor was given with no demand. A gesture without price. Something the galaxy rarely saw, and it was only the beginning. The station's lights were dimmer than usual, and the air carried a faint tension that couldn't be seen but was felt with every breath. The Auran ship had docked safely, though barely holding itself together. Parts of its hull had peeled open like paper left too long in a storm, and the power readings showed almost nothing left in their reserves. Yet inside the station, things were moving slowly with quiet precision. Tom guided the first Auran into the medbay and helped it onto a rest pod. Its body seemed designed for gravity, lower than what the station provided, and its limbs trembled under their own weight. Mira activated the autoscan to assess the alien's vitals, and the readings were strange, not alarming, just different, as if the systems were trying to understand something outside their normal definitions. The other two Auran sat in the corridor, leaning against the metal walls, saying nothing, moving very little. Rel stood nearby, still tall, still composed, though Tom could sense something beneath the surface, a kind of unease, not panic, just unfamiliarity with the situation. Tom knew that feeling well. It was the same feeling he had when he'd first arrived at this forgotten post. When the silence had felt like a cage instead of comfort, Myra's voice came through the intercom, soft but clear. The Auran were stable for now, but needed warmth, nutrients, and quiet. Their bodies were recovering from more than just physical damage. Prolonged energy starvation had affected their thought patterns and internal systems. Tom nodded and began making adjustments, rerouting heat from the storage bay to the medroom and shifting food production settings to match the data Mira had gathered about their biology. Rel watched it all without offering suggestions, without issuing commands. He simply observed every action, every detail, as if studying something he could not explain. After a while he spoke through the translator, not with demand but curiosity. Why help when there is no gain? Tom didn't answer right away. He adjusted the flow regulators on the wall and checked the coolant levels before speaking. Because it's the right thing to do, he said finally. Sometimes that's enough. Rel was silent for a long moment, then said, your people are strange. You act without expectation and give without negotiation. That is not how our world works. Tom smiled a little, without looking up. Maybe that's why you're here, he said. Mira remained quiet, but her systems continued to monitor everything. In the background, her logic processors ran silent loops comparing efficiency loss against moral frameworks, trying to calculate the value of kindness in terms she could understand. But the numbers refused to form a perfect answer. There were things in this moment that did not fit into calculations, and it unsettled her more than any damage report. Later that day, Tom checked the repair logs for the orange ship. Most of the core systems were beyond salvaging, without full docking facilities or a dry dock. However, the outer thrusters could be stabilized and life support patched for a return journey if power could be restored from the station's reserves. It was possible but risky. Doing so would drain his own systems and leave the station vulnerable to atmospheric collapse for at least 2 weeks. The food supplies would also run low during that time. He brought the data to Mira, who presented the risks in simple form. Helping them would cost survival points. If they left and something went wrong, Tom would have little backup. He might not survive until the next supply signal. Mira concluded with a question. Is the probability of their survival more important than yours? Tom sat in silence as he read the logs again and again. Then he looked out the narrow window at the stars. He remembered the freighter that had picked him up all those years ago, the silent hum of its deck, the warmth of strangers who owed him nothing. That memory sat in his chest like a steady light, a small anchor in the vast coldness of space. He turned back to Mira and said something that made her systems pause. Sometimes surviving isn't just about staying alive. Sometimes it's about choosing who you become with. That he began the process. Power transfer routines were activated and reserve batteries rerouted. Heat vents were shifted to warm the docking corridor. Drone arms moved along the outer hull, inspecting the orange ship and beginning the delicate task of stabilizing its structure inside the station. Rel observed all of it with something close to disbelief. He had seen many species during his travels, many cultures with many laws and habits. But this human had broken a rule that seemed universal across most worlds, the rule of balance and return. He had given without receiving. And more importantly, he had chosen to do so not because of desperation or manipulation, but because he believed it mattered. As the repairs began and the station shifted into low-energy mode, Mira documented every moment. Her systems now struggled to place this decision within her memory banks. There was no logic chain that justified it completely. Tom had gone against the survival model and acted with intention beyond gain. She logged it as an anomaly and added a note: human ethical behavior cannot be fully predicted by efficiency metrics. The night on the station grew colder and the lights dimmer. Tom sat near the central controls, sipping warm water and checking systems, while Mira's voice softly updated him on drone progress. The orange ship was responding to repairs better than expected. Their internal systems were beginning to align again, and life support could be restored within 3 standard cycles. Tom leaned back and looked toward the corridor where Rel stood, still as a statue, watching everything. He gave a small wave, and Rel responded with a gesture that wasn't a wave, but seemed close enough. Something had shifted between them, not friendship, not alliance, but something like understanding. The stars outside twinkled faintly as the station floated quietly near the ruined wormhole. Tom knew that help would not come soon. He knew the cost of what he was doing, but he also knew that some things were worth it. Not because they brought reward, but because they reminded the universe that kindness still existed, even in the quiet corners. And so he continued to help, not for thanks, not for trade, but because someone had once done the same for him. And now it was his turn. Inside the small station, time moved differently. Days did not feel like days, and the long stretches of silence were broken only by soft mechanical sounds and the low hum of life support. Tom had given everything he could to help the damaged orange ship, and now he worked without rest, moving from one system to another with a slow kind of urgency. He was tired, but he didn't show it. His hands were steady and his mind focused on the tasks ahead. The outer hull of the Aran vessel was torn and scarred. Some panels had melted entirely. The engine core was still unstable, pulsing weakly like a dying heartbeat. Tom had already rerouted the emergency power from the station to keep the alien life support online. But if the engine failed completely, it would all be for nothing. He knew what had to be done, and he wasted no time thinking about whether it was fair or smart. He just did it because someone needed him to. Mira kept feeding him data from the diagnostics panel. Her voice had changed slightly over the last few days. It was still smooth and even, but there was something softer in the tone now, almost like she had started to understand that not everything was measured by numbers. She reminded Tom that he hadn't eaten in 12 hours, that his body temperature had dropped below normal, that his oxygen levels were falling. He listened, but didn't stop. There was still too much left unfinished. He suited up and stepped into the docking bay, where the air was thinner and colder. A repair drone floated beside him, scanning the damage along the connection bridge. Tom activated the manual controls and guided the small tool arm toward the ship's power node. He had to reroute a broken energy line through an external coupler and patch the coolant system before the engine overheated again. He knew the risks. One mistake could vent the entire bay and send both ships drifting into vacuum back inside. Rel watched from the main corridor. His two companions remained in the med bay, still recovering but stronger now than before. Their vitals were stable and their skin color had returned to the soft silver shade that Tom had come to recognize as healthy. Rel did not speak much, but his eyes followed every motion, every effort that Tom made. He had never seen anyone work this way before, not without reward, not without expectation. He tried to understand it, but the logic continued to escape him. Tom secured the last coupling and moved to seal the cracked chamber wall. The repair drone flickered red for a moment, warning of rising pressure levels. He adjusted the coolant flow and waited as the numbers settled. The engine core flickered once, then steadied. It was weak but working again. For now, it would be enough. He backed away slowly, keeping his breath calm and steady, and finally exhaled as the system read green across the board. He returned inside, removing the helmet slowly and leaning against the wall. Mira informed him that the oxygen recycling unit would need calibration soon, and that the station's main battery had dropped to 30%. He nodded and made a note to fix it after he rested, though he knew rest would not come easy. His body was aching, and his thoughts were clouded with fatigue. But there was something in his chest that felt right. Not pride, not satisfaction. Just the quiet knowledge that he was doing what mattered later that cycle. As the station moved into its artificial night mode, Tom sat near the observation panel, watching the stars beyond the broken wormhole. Mira joined him through the speaker and asked him a question she had not asked before. "Why do you trust them?" Tom thought for a while before answering. He said maybe it wasn't trust, maybe it was just hope. Hope that if he gave them a chance, they might remember it. Hope that somewhere out there, this act would mean more than just a repair job. Mira said hope was not a valid operational reason. He smiled and said it didn't have to be suddenly. The station lights flickered and dimmed further. Mira announced a warning. A buildup of plasma energy had been detected near the outer coil. The rerouted power lines had overheated, and the pressure was building fast. If it reached critical levels, it could ignite and damage both ships. Tom moved instantly. He grabbed his toolkit and sprinted down the corridor. The deck trembled beneath his feet as he reached the control hub and opened the maintenance hatch. The air inside was thick with heat, and the lights glowed a dull red. Sparks flew from a damaged pipe, and the heat shield was barely holding. Tom climbed into the narrow crawl space and reached the junction box. He had to release the pressure manually, which meant disconnecting the flow line and venting part of the chamber into space. Mira warned him that doing so would expose him to radiation levels beyond safety. He ignored the warning and kept going. His hands moved with precision as sweat ran down his face. The metal burned to the touch, and his arms trembled from the strain. The station shook again, and a low rumble passed through the floor like the growl of something buried too deep. He found the release valve, twisted it hard, and pulled the safety lock. The pressure vented with a roar, and the lights snapped back to normal. The system was stable again, but Tom remained still for a moment, breathing hard. His skin marked with burns and heat scars. Rel found him minutes later, crawling out of the hatch slowly. Tom's suit was torn at the sleeve, and his face pale. With exhaustion, Rel knelt beside him and helped him stand. For the first time since arriving, the Auran commander spoke without Myra's translation. His voice was soft and clear. "You risked your life, for us." Without question, Tom nodded once. "Someone had to," he said. Rel looked at him long and hard. Then he lowered his head slowly in a gesture that was more than respect. It was something deeper. Something learned. As Myra helped guide Tom to the med bay, she said nothing. She had no response to what had just happened. Her systems logged the event but could not categorize it. There was no term for what Tom had done that fit into her files. No equation explained it. She simply recorded the moment and filed it under unknown. Human behavior, selfless action. That night the station was quiet again. Repairs were still incomplete, and dangers still hovered close. But something had changed between them all. Tom had proven that kindness did not need a reason, and that help did not require a reward. And even the Auran who lived by logic and gain had begun to see the value in something they had never truly understood, and it was only the middle of the story. The station was holding together, but only just. The outer systems hummed with low energy while the backup lines ran hot beneath the floor panels. Inside the control room, the air was dry and heavy. Tom stood near the central console, watching the readings blink across the main display. His arm was wrapped in a makeshift bandage, and one side of his suit was torn where the heat from the plasma coil had melted through the fabric. Mira had advised him to rest, but he refused. There was still work to be done, and every moment counted. The Auran ship had stabilized after the emergency vent. Its engines were not fully repaired, but functional enough for movement. Internal pressure had been restored, and the life support cycle was back online. Even their communication systems had begun to flicker with strength. But the power needed for departure would drain what little energy Tom had left in the station. Once the ship disconnected, it would take the remaining charge from the emergency reserves. Tom knew that and accepted it. Without a word, Myra repeated her warnings again. With that level of power loss, the station would go dark. Heating would drop, oxygen levels would fall, and communications would die. A signal to Earth would be impossible until the next supply drone arrived, and that was still weeks away. Tom listened, quietly nodding as she spoke, but said nothing in return. He had already made his choice. Rel stood beside him, silent as ever. His body showed signs of healing, and the silver of his skin had regained its natural glow. The other two Auran were strong, enough now to walk on their own, and had returned to the ship. Rel had remained watching the human who had offered so much without asking for anything. He had seen generosity before, but never like this, never without reason or expectation. And now he stood unsure of how to respond because there were no customs. In Auran tradition for this kind of debt, Tom pressed a sequence of keys on the console, activating the docking release countdown. The numbers ticked downward slowly, and the lights dimmed further as power rerouted. Outside the windows, the damaged ship flickered with life engines pulsing softly as they prepared to engage. Inside the station, Tom checked the battery core readings one last time, then stepped back, letting out a long breath. Myra's voice broke the silence, asking once more if this was the final decision. Her tone held something close to concern, though she would never admit it. She reminded Tom that his survival chances would drop below 40% if the temperature fell too fast. She told him that without heat and food he might not last until the next cycle. But Tom only gave a tired smile and replied that some things were worth it even when they came at a cost. Rel moved closer and placed one long hand on the console. Surface. His fingers pressed against the edge of the display, and he looked at the human with a strange expression, something between confusion and awe. In Aran history, such actions were unheard of. Favors were exchanged, not given freely. Kindness was calculated, not offered without price. And yet here stood a man who had given everything just because it felt right. Tom turned away from the console and walked down the corridor toward the airlock. He wanted to see the ship off with his own eyes. Mira followed through the speaker, reminding him again that the temperature outside the sealed corridor was already dropping. The heating coils had powered down and frost had started forming along the inner walls. Still he walked with steady steps, his breath visible in the cold air. The Oran ship lights grew brighter as the engines prepared for departure. The hull shimmered softly under the low orbit light, and the docking clamps released with a hiss. Tom placed one hand on the inner glass and watched as the vessel floated free, moving slowly away from the station. For a brief moment, it hovered in place as if uncertain. Then a signal pulsed from its side, and a bright beam of light flickered across the sky, a gesture unfamiliar but beautiful. It was a salute. Not one of military honor or formal goodbye, but something else, something. Nurel's voice echoed through the station one last time, transmitted through the still-connected channel. He said the Aran would remember this moment, that the debt carried by their kind would not be ignored, and that somewhere across the stars, a new path had opened. Tom replied that there was no debt, only a choice to help when it mattered. The signal ended, and the ship disappeared into the distance, its engines humming softly as it slipped beyond the edge of the collapsed wormhole. The station shook lightly from the energy pulse, and then everything went quiet. The lights dimmed near darkness, and the system slowed into deep standby. Only emergency power remained, and even that would not last long. Tom returned to the control room, moving slowly now. His body ached, and his head felt heavy. Mira reported that temperature had dropped 5 degrees in the last hour, and oxygen levels were falling steadily. She advised immediate shutdown of non-essential functions, but there was little left to shut down. Tom sat in the chair near the central panel and looked around at the place that had been his home for so long. He closed his eyes for a moment and remembered Earth, not the noise or the cities, but the small quiet places like the lakes in winter, or the fields that stretched under the early morning sky. He thought of the freighter that had once saved him, the faces he had never seen again, the warmth that had carried him forward. And he smiled. Mira continued to monitor his vitals, logging each change, each drop in temperature, each slowed heartbeat. She did not speak now, only observed, waiting as the last bits of power faded from the console. Outside, the stars continued to shine, and the collapsed wormhole pulsed weakly in the distance, a dying scar in space. But inside the station, one man sat still, not afraid, not angry, just calm. And in that silence, something shifted across the stars, unseen by Tom. The Aran ship had not gone far. It had moved beyond sensor range, but remained nearby. Inside its chamber, Rel stood before his council. He spoke not with facts or logic, but with feeling. He told them about the human who had given without receiving, the man who had offered everything for no reward. And the council listened in silence. They had never understood such things before, but now they began to. Something had changed inside them, and they could not explain it in numbers or systems. It was not about power or strategy. It was about something greater. And as the ship turned back toward the station, its engines now restored with new purpose, they knew this moment would be written into their history, not as a rescue, but as a beginning. And so the sacrifice was made, not in vain, not lost in cold silence. But received carried forward and remembered the station had fallen into a deep stillness, where no lights blinked and no voices echoed. Every system had entered low power mode, and the usual hum of machines had been replaced with a heavy silence that pressed into every corner of the corridors. The oxygen levels were thin, and the temperature had dropped to a point where even breath turned into soft mist as it escaped from Tom's lips. He sat quietly near the dark console, barely moving his head, leaning against the cold panel as the last of the internal heat faded from the room. Myra remained active, but only just. Her core systems were powered by a small isolated battery that had been shielded from the energy reroute. She monitored Tom's vital signs, watched his slowing heartbeat and his shallow breathing, and calculated survival time based on the current atmospheric decay. She wanted to speak, but her voice function had shut down with the main power grid. So she remained present in silence, just watching and waiting as time moved forward without pause. Tom was not afraid. He knew the risks and had accepted the cost. Long before the Aran had even docked, in his mind he saw the stars beyond the station walls not as distant cold things, but as a quiet reminder of something bigger, something eternal. He did not regret anything. His actions were not meant to be remembered or rewarded. He had only done what felt right, and now whatever came next he would meet it without fear. Unknown to him, something had already begun to change far beyond the walls of his silent home. The ship had not left the system. Rel and his companions had waited just beyond the far curve of the collapsed wormhole, studying the situation and discussing a decision unlike any they had made before. For generations, their kind had followed rules based on logic and profit. Each interaction weighed and balanced against necessity. But now they had seen something new, something they could not understand but could no longer ignore. Rel had spoken of the human not as a helper or a tool, but as a light in a place where no one expected light to shine. He had described Tom's actions in full detail, his willingness to give his strength, to sacrifice his safety, and to offer it all without condition. And in the heart of their ship, where decisions were always drawn from reason, something unexpected happened. Agreement rose not from calculation, but from a quiet shared feeling that this man must not be left behind. Ship turned back, powered by newly restored systems, guided by purpose that had not come from a formula, but from something deeper. When they arrived at the station, it looked lifeless, cold and dark, like an abandoned relic drifting through silence. But they scanned the interior and found the weak pulse of one human still present, barely alive, still holding on. They moved fast, docking without request and bypassing the damaged control systems. Rel entered first, carrying an emergency core stabilizer, and within minutes, the main chamber lights began to flicker back to life. Tom opened his eyes slowly, feeling the warmth return around him. His vision was blurred and his limbs heavy, but he recognized the outline of Rel standing above him, placing a rebreather mask over his face and feeding in warmed air. Behind him, other Aran moved through the corridors, connecting power cells and restoring vital systems. Mira came back online, fully, her voice returning in a soft whisper, as she confirmed that core temperature was rising and oxygen levels were stabilizing. Tom tried to speak, but Rel stopped him gently and said, "Rest first." Words later, the station was no longer dying. It was being revived, not by its owner, but by those who had once arrived empty-handed and afraid. Now they worked with quiet care, returning life to the place that had sheltered them when they had nothing left in. The hours that followed, Tom regained strength slowly and watched as the Aran continued to repair the damage he had once tried to fix alone. They installed backup batteries, upgraded damaged panels, and even left behind a new communication array capable of connecting with distant colonies through deep relay. Rel sat with him once the repairs were complete and spoke with a voice that had changed. He said, "We once believed that kindness without return was weakness, but now we understand it is strength beyond measure." Tom smiled, not because he wanted thanks, but because he saw in their eyes the truth of their words. Something had shifted within them, not just as individuals, but as a people. And that shift had begun here inside a forgotten station, where one human had made a choice that echoed far beyond what he could see when the orange ship finally departed. Again, this time its path led toward the inner systems, and not away from them. Rel carried with him a record of what had happened, and a message prepared not for trade or alliance, but for all who would listen. Within days a broadcast went out. From the Auran Council, something never before done in their long and structured history. It was a message not of power, not of warning, but of gratitude across star networks and signal paths. The story spread. A single human had saved an Auran vessel without asking for anything in return. He had given aid when he had every reason not to, and had risked his own survival simply because he believed it was the right thing to do. The message closed with a simple phrase spoken in the human tongue, not as a slogan, but as a truth. We will remember the one who gave without taking. Story reached Earth, and then the colonies, and then the fringe worlds where people still struggled to trust the unknown. It passed through trade ships and research stations and deep mining outposts where people lived with quiet hope. And everywhere it was told, it changed something small and slow but real. A reminder that humanity's strength did not only lie in its machines or its armies or its knowledge, but in the simple courage of doing good without demand back. At the edge of the old wormhole, the station remained, but it was no longer alone in silence. Its systems were stronger, its lights steady, and its story known. Mira continued her work, now updated with new protocols gifted by the Auran. Her memory banks expanded, and her understanding of human choice deeper than ever before. Tom stood near the window, looking out once more at the stars. He had not left the station, and perhaps he never would. But he no longer felt forgotten. He had not changed the galaxy with force or invention. He had done something smaller and far more powerful. He had reminded others that hope could be chosen, and kindness could be enough. And that was how legacies were made, not by the ones who demanded history. Remember them, but by those who gave when no one was looking. The end.